Good afternoon, everyone. Warm welcome to the special event on the BC government's infrastructure survey, which we've titled Which Energy Future for BC? My name is Doug Cordemosh. I'm your MC for the afternoon. I'm a volunteer with WCEL, which is the West Coast Climate Action Network. So I want to acknowledge that we all live in the traditional lands of numerous First Nations across BC, and they've lived here and sustained the land for thousands of years before European settlers arrived in the 1800s, colonizing their land, pushing Indigenous people into tiny reserves, banning traditional ceremonies, imprisoning leaders, countering resistance with gunships, dishonoring the few treaties that were signed, and sending their children off to distant residential schools without regard for the parents, the culture, or their emotional well-being. So we honor Indigenous resilience, fortitude, resistance, and the determination to sustain their cultures, teachings, and their reciprocal approach to life on the planet. And now that we also make our homes on these unceded lands, we too have the responsibility to care for them. We need to end the era of extraction and exploitation in which we and all mankind look after ourselves and all our relations. Ichukila. So this is a joint event. It's co-organized by the West Coast Climate Action Network, Organizing for Change, and Ecojustice. And our purpose in gathering is to participate in the government's public survey related to Bill 15, which gave the BC government the green light to fast track any number of big infrastructure projects. But which projects? And that's why what their survey is about. We're playing for some high stakes. So will BC become a fossil fuel superpower or a clean energy superpower? And the answer is not going to be both, I guess. Our team of presenters are from our subject matter experts and policy experts from Ecojustice, West Coast Environmental Law, and Organization for Change. And I'm going to turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves and take us through the presentation. We have Sarah Corpan from Ecojustice, Emma Dola from Organization for Change, Matthew Nefsted from West Coast Environmental Law, and Sebastian Seja from Organization for Change. Take it away, whoever's following me.
Perfect. Thanks, Doug. That'll be me. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, we'll jump into some intros momentarily. Prior to that, just run you through a bit of an agenda. As we noted, we'll go through some introductions. Matthew will take it over for some context setting around what the Infrastructure Projects Act actually is. And then we'll jump into the engagement process that we're asking you to participate in and provide you with a walkthrough of the survey. Of course, Doug is our MC for today, so thank you so much, Doug. Maybe I'll just introduce myself and then I can pass it over to Emma and Matthew. So again, folks, hi, I'm Sarah Corpin. I am Ecojustice's Government Relations and Campaign Manager, and I am joining you from Lekwungen Territory here in so-called Victoria, and I'll pass it over to Emma.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Dole. Hi, I'm calling in from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Territory, or so-called Vancouver. I'm the policy specialist with Organizing for Change, and I'm really excited to be here today. And I'll pass it over to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Emma. My name is Matthew Nefsted. I'm a staff lawyer at West Coast Environmental Law, focusing on law reform projects, including the Infrastructure Projects Act. And I am also calling in from the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples in Victoria. The other person who is here who I can introduce is Sebastian Seda with OFC. Sebastian, if you want to.
Yeah, I'm the organizing program manager here at OFC, coming in from the unceded traditional territory, the Samiao, Katsi, and Kwantlen people here in Surrey. And I'll pass it on to you, Matthew. Do you want to close us out on this part?
Yeah, so just on this slide before we move on, just noting the valuable assistance of Andra Azevedo, Victoria Watson, and Rachel Gutman, all staff lawyers at Ecojustice. They all made significant contributions to the survey guide that we're going to be talking to you about today. And we appreciate the work that everyone has done on this. So moving on, we are going to talk about a bit of context. to sort of set the stage, and then we'll move on to talking about the engagement process that we're here to focus on today. So I want to give you a bit of an introduction to the Infrastructure Projects Act, what it is and why it matters. This is a bill that was passed as Bill 15 in May of this year. There was not a lot of opportunity for debate in the legislature and almost no consultation with First Nations or the public. It was sold by the government as a schools and hospitals bill, very focused on that sort of urban public infrastructure, but in fact, the scope of the legislation is much broader than that. And what this act really does is it provides a framework for fast-tracking major projects. It does that in a number of ways. There's a whole suite of tools that are available for projects that are designated under the Act. That includes moving projects to the front of the line for permitting, allowing projects to use an accelerated environmental assessment process, making some permits, some provincial permits automatic once an environmental assessment has been completed, and allowing other permitting decisions to be made by what are called qualified professionals, which are independent private consultants instead of government regulators. And it provides some mechanisms to circumvent local government laws and processes, sometimes with the agreement of those local governments, but also gives the option for the provincial government to override local governments who aren't willing to agree. And applying all these tools, if it's done in the wrong way, could lead to projects bypassing important environmental assessment processes and sidestepping government scrutiny and accountability. The legislation that was passed in the House in the legislature is a very broad framework with a bunch of key details missing. And so it's hard to say exactly what the effect of the legislation will be, which is why the engagement that we're talking about here today is so important, because that will the regulations that are under development now will be what fill in the gaps in the legislation and determine what its actual effect on the ground is going to be. So the Infrastructure Projects Act enables the provincial government to designate infrastructure projects in two categories. The first is provincial capital projects. These are the schools and hospitals and things like that, infrastructure projects built and owned by the provincial government. And then there are what are called provincially significant projects, and that's category 2. And provincially significant projects are built by other proponents such as private industry, First Nations, municipalities, crown corporations. And much of the focus of today's presentation will be on that second category, the provincially significant projects. But it's important to note that the tools that I talked about that are enabled by this act, the kinds of things that that designation can do for a project, the shortening of approval processes and all of that, apply to both categories of projects. So there will be some discussion of those tools, and that applies to both the provincial capital projects and the provincially significant projects. So as I mentioned, today we're focusing on the category of provincially significant projects, and the province is proposing a 4-step framework for determining whether a project should be eligible for designation under this category. And in order for a project to be designated, it has to satisfy each of the 4 steps. First, it has to be one of a list of eligible project types. So these are, broad categories of projects that the government sees as being significant to the province. There has to be a certain level of First Nation decision makers support, and that's support for the use of the tools under the Act, not necessarily support for the project. At least that's how they're framing it so far. There's a list of core requirements, which are a list of criteria that every project needs to meet. They have to meet all of those core requirements. And then there's a list of additional benefits, and the project needs to provide at least one of the benefits in that list. And we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail as we go ahead.
Thanks, Matthew. So the purpose of the engagement process is to inform the development of the regulations under the Infrastructure Projects Act, as Matthew noted before. The regulations are where we'll get the details that are currently missing in the language of the actual legislation. This makes participating in the engagement process very important because these details are going to be a really crucial guiding point for how this legislation is actually going to be used by the province. The engagement process has been broken into 3 phases. Phase 1 seeks feedback on defining the eligibility criteria for provincially significant projects. That's that first category that Matthew referenced before. This is the phase that we're currently in and what the survey guide supports you through. Then there's phase 2, which touches on the qualified professional reliance model. And this will address how and when to allow certain permitting decisions to be made by independent qualified professionals, as Matthew previously covered. Then phase 3 will solicit feedback on the expedited environmental assessment process under the Act. Public surveys are currently open for phases 1 and 2, but again, this survey guide only focuses on phase 1. We will be providing some links at the end of this presentation, and we have included a link to the public survey on phase 2, the qualified professional reliance model. If you feel comfortable jumping into that, you're more than welcome to. But again, the scope of today's conversation will just be on that phase 1. And I also imagine that there will be a lot of folks interested in the expedited environmental assessment phase. It's not yet open. I think it's supposed to open sometime in the fall, October or November, and it'll go until March 2026. So stay tuned for more details on that. And I'll go to the next slide. Okay, as already noted, phase 1 of engagement will help inform the development of the regulations that define the requirements a project must meet to be designated as provincially significant. I've just copied the diagram you've already seen with the colorful circles here, just to kind of reiterate that this is the framework that this phase seeks feedback on. It's also important to note that the First Nations decision maker support circle is not explicitly in scope for this survey, so you won't see a page of the survey addressing that criteria directly, but the survey guide provides some suggested responses through the other pages to address the need for consultation with and consent from First Nations. Next slide, please. Thank you. Jumping back into the engagement process, the public survey is the only avenue for public input for phase 1, or at least for phases 1 and 2. There's been minimal promotion from the government on this engagement process, and the survey is hard to find, and it's kind of dense. And, you know, unless you have some direct interest and background and expertise in this, it can be kind of confusing to navigate. And it just further highlights how important your participation is in this process. So we can signal to government that we are paying attention, and we will be holding them accountable to a just and fair approach to implementing the IPA. This doesn't necessarily mean that we are demonstrating that we agree with the general concept of fast-tracking projects, but if this is something that they're going to propose, then we want to make sure that we hold them accountable to not doing it in a reckless way. The survey deadline for phase 1 is September 30th, which gives you just under 2 weeks to complete the survey. And again, we're here to answer any of those questions to make that process a lot easier. And now we'll go to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Emma to talk a bit about the survey and the guide.
Hi, everyone. So I'll be pretty fast on this so we can sort of jump into the nitty-gritty of the survey itself, but I'll just give a bit of background on how the survey and our guide work so we can all feel a bit more comfortable with that going in. So the survey itself has 7 sections that you'll see on the screen there, and you might recognize they sort of largely respond to that framework with the circles that we saw earlier. So a lot of the questions are really asking for feedback on that framework as proposed. And we'll go through each section in a fair amount more detail in a second. Overall, the survey takes about 15 to 20 minutes to complete, so it is a bit of time, but hopefully this makes it more accessible and each response is really appreciated. It also has multiple choice and long form questions, which you'll see when filling it out. And we've designed it so that we've given answers for the maximum number of questions that you can answer. So answering the multiple choice in certain ways reveals more long form questions. And so we've given you guidance on how to reveal the maximum number of narrative response boxes, but you don't have to answer all of them. And we'll go to the next slide. So the way we've structured our survey guide is we've created what we're calling a menu of options. And this lets you pick your preferred option or options to help inspire your answer. And what we're hoping this does is let you pick the topic or topics that are most important to you, and gives you different ideas for how to approach writing your answers. And we've designed all of our answers to be within the character count, which is unfortunately 500 characters, excluding spaces. It's quite a small response box. But within that, we really encourage editing and personalizing your responses. The more things are really personalized and unique, the more likely it is that the ministry will hopefully take them into account. And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so before we dive into the specifics and get started, a few more quick things to highlight. We really want to emphasize that all questions are optional, so you're welcome to leave anything blank that you're not comfortable answering. It will still let you hit submit at the end with blank responses. You can also start the survey and save an incomplete version to finish later. There's a little option to save your survey in the right-hand corner on the government website, but if you're having any technical difficulties, we can show you how to do this at the end of the presentation. You can also feel free to open the link to the government survey now and sort of explore it on your own or have it open in another tab while we're presenting, if you're like me and that sort of concrete visual is really helpful to you. And lastly, we really want to emphasize again that this guide has sort of fully written out answer options and is meant to make this feel really as accessible as possible. But we want you to feel full ownership to edit, shorten, or combine sample answers however you see fit, including if there are sort of personal links you have to these issues that you want to and feel comfortable highlighting, or your own unique perspectives that can be really powerful. We'll also share at the end, West Coast Environmental Law has put together a helpful PDF showing what it looks like to sort of combine various answers together and create your own answers from this guide. And so we'll share that if it's helpful. And I'll now pass it back to Sarah to get into the specific parts of the guide.
Great. Yeah. Okay, so we'll now just go through a really quick overview of the survey itself. We won't get into our proposed responses here in this PowerPoint. You'll see those when we provide an overview of the survey guide. This is just to orient you in what to expect from the survey. And then, of course, again, there will be time for questions and seeking clarity on all of these different pieces during the Q&A portion. So we won't spend much more time on this slide because it's very straightforward. Again, we just want to do a bit of a one-for-one of what to expect page by page with the survey. And this one's just seeking background information. So essentially, in what role are you responding to the survey as? That's your personal choice to respond however you like. So of course, we're not going to really provide guidance on that. So we can just head right over into the next slide. And now we are going into the first page that kind of gets into the nitty-gritty of the survey. So it starts by seeking feedback on the project types eligible for the provincially significant designation. It covers that pink circle of that formula that we showed you previously. BC has proposed 10 eligible project types. Those types are outlined in the survey, and we also include that list of proposed project types in the survey guide itself. This is a really important element of the criteria because, of course, it defines what types or categories of projects should be or could be eligible for fast tracking. And so it creates an opportunity to tell government what types of projects shouldn't be eligible, uplifting types of projects that should be eligible, and suggesting refinements for those already listed. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, then we go into core requirements. So all core requirements must be met by an eligible project type to be considered for designation, as Matthew had previously noted. You'll see that the BC government includes 3 proposed core requirements, and the scope of those requirements is very limited. They're more focused on cost considerations and demonstrating why red tape is a barrier to a project moving forward, rather than taking a more holistic approach of, ensuring that environmental standards are maintained, or that the project will help to achieve our climate goals, anything like that. So you will see when we show you the survey guide and when you review the guide yourself that we kind of offer some proposed responses that address that gap. Okay, next slide, and I will pass it over to Matthew.
All right, so the next section is on the additional benefits. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a list of additional benefits that have been proposed, and all but one of these are fairly economically focused. So a project only needs to have at least one of the listed additional benefits to be eligible for designation, but even so, the way that the additional benefits are framed makes it potentially very difficult for nature-focused or other public interest projects to make it past this step, just because they are so focused on economics. And so one suggestion that we're making, and that you may wish to make as well in your response, is to add additional benefits that recognize the value of environmental integrity and various social benefits that may not be reflected strictly in economics, to allow for a broader range of what we might see as positive projects to make use of some of the tools in this legislation. And then the next page of the survey is about this framework overall. So that 4-step eligibility framework that the government has proposed. This page is about how do you feel about that framework in general? So not just adding or removing project types, but is this the right lens to look at this question of eligibility through? Is there a better way that that we could be determining whether projects are provincially significant? The way we've basically approached this is to we haven't proposed an alternative framework, but we have taken this opportunity to highlight some of the issues we see with this framework in terms of factors that aren't properly addressed, to try and help fill in those gaps. This page of the survey also talks about transparency and accountability, and that's something that, of course, we also think is very important. And we have some suggestions on how to make this whole process more transparent and accountable. I'll also just note that at the bottom of this page of the survey, there is a question that asks whether you are willing to answer some additional questions about the Infrastructure Projects Act. The survey up to this point is focused on the eligibility requirements for provincially significant projects. but there are some additional questions about some of the broader aspects of the legislation and the tools under it. And so selecting yes there will allow you to answer some more questions about those. And so this optional page that's enabled if you select that question focuses on the tools enabled by the Act. So I gave a bit of a summary of those earlier. That includes the accelerated or alternative permitting processes, changes to the environmental assessment process, and the tools available to override local government rules. And we've provided some suggested responses for feedback on each of those tools. And again, just a reminder that although most of the survey is about that category 2, the provincially significant projects, the tools enabled by the Act that are addressed in this page of the survey will apply to the provincial capital projects as well, the ones owned by the government. And then there's the final page of the survey that asks for some demographic information about you. This is entirely optional, and it's up to you whether to provide it. And now I will pass it. Is this Sebastian? Are you taking this part to talk about the survey guide?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna just spotlight myself for a moment here and actually take off this presentation to share instead my screen here. Apologize for the delay. Okay, great. So yeah, I got a lot of things open, but I just wanted to ground folks in what our survey guide looks like, and I'll be sharing that link in the chat once I'm done speaking and passing it on to Sarah. But essentially our guide, it's hosted on the Organizing for Change website, but it kind of mimics the appearance of the government guide, so you can kind of tell where you are. There's sort of a progress bar, and it sort of uses the same language. We include these screenshots that aren't interactable, but they're just sort of the screenshots of what's actually on the page that we're giving guidance to on the government website. And yeah, again, these aren't interactable. This is just to show you what is on the government website. What is interactable is our sort of message drafting box here. And this is just a text box where you can write in your responses and have that max character count. Unlike the government one, we don't cut you off at 500 characters, but you will have to edit down to 500 characters and then hit that copy button to copy your response and then put it into the government website. But really what's important about this is that we have all of these excellently prepared responses that can be used to help draft your own response. And so you'll see on this page, there's several that are available, categorized into different sections. If you just click this Add to Draft button, it will add that information to your draft box where you can then edit it, make it your own, personalize it. Definitely personalization is super important. But if you like more than one, you're free to add more than one. Though you'll see that in adding these two together, I've gone over my limit. It's red. Copy is disabled. We need to edit this down to 500 characters in order to get it into the government website. So hopefully that's clear enough. If folks have any questions, you're free to contact me. There is a contact at the end of the presentation that'll have my email and let you get any help that you need on doing this. And with that, I will pass it back to Sarah to take us through the rest of the guide itself.
Okay, so we'll go through a very quick overview of the guide. I will pass over this first page, like we previously noted, and
Sorry, Sarah, if I could just interject, if you want to just refresh that first page, there is now a link there to the the sample PDF completed survey. Yeah,
oh, I see it right there.
that West Coast prepared. So if anyone wants to see what it might look like to sort of synthesize some of these responses into answers and just one completed example, you can find that there. But we definitely encourage you to mix and match and make your own responses. This is just in case that's helpful for anyone.
Yeah, this, and like Matthew's saying, this as you will be able to see once we go back into the survey guide. West Coast Guide offers a really great example of how to merge a couple of different options together. I'll show you for this page on project type specifically. So like Sebastian noted, we have a few different options to respond to the long form question. One thing you'll notice throughout the survey guide as well is we don't always provide suggestions for responding to some of these more forced choice, like multiple choice kind of questions. West Coast Guide offers some guidance on that. So if you want some specificity there, that will be a really helpful guiding point. I think for us, what we were focusing on was more the questions that like more the long form questions, as well as where there's like a very clear answer for how we feel some of these questions should be responded to. But yeah, so it's entirely up to you to select your top 5 choices here for provincially significant or types of projects that should be designated as provincially significant. You also don't have to choose 5. And I think that, you know, a lot of these are probably pretty obvious as to what will be in alignment for folks like us. But then we'll go right down into this long form question, which appears when you select yes here to the question of whether or not there's any eligible project types missing. So we have a few different categories. And to kind of sum up our proposed responses here, I would say that our general guidance is around ensuring clarity and specificity around project types. And that plays into the responses in different ways. So for example, you'll notice that we have a fossil fuel category. There are no proposed fossil fuel project types in the proposed project type list from government. But the BC government has noted verbally through media statements and otherwise that LNG and pipelines will not be in scope for fast tracking or to be considered like to be designated as provincially significant. Great that they're loosely saying that, but it would be it's really important for that limit to be clarified and specified within the regulations. So that's kind of where our proposed responses go for the fossil fuel portion. And I think another theme carrying us through, and this is something that Matthew had noted before, government has also committed to ensuring that the use of this act does not lower BC's environmental standards. So keeping that in mind too, of like, okay, well, how do we keep them to that commitment that again is nowhere in the legislation itself, is another thing to keep in mind while going through this survey and responding. Critical minerals and mining, we kind of offer 2 different approaches. You know, first and foremost, critical minerals and mining, that should not be a project type. But if you do want to create, if you want to take an approach of like, okay, well, what if government does move forward with that as a project type? Then creating some, again, specificity, some guardrails, some conditions around how that project type is used is something that we propose here with this project type or with this category of responses. And then going back to that specificity piece, just a couple of proposed responses noting a lack of clarity and how the project types themselves are too broad. And a couple of comments on 2 of the proposed project types from the government on public infrastructure and housing projects, noting that the public infrastructure piece kind of leaves a back door for almost any public project to be eligible and noting some concerns around that. And then with the housing project type, just recommending some specificity there to prioritize climate-proof housing. Going on to the next page of core requirements. So this page is quite a similar format to the previous one where it prompts you with a question of whether anything is missing from these core requirements. And if you answer yes, it takes you to a long form response. Like we noted in the presentation, The core requirements are very economic focused, more focused on project readiness, capital costs, very fiscal. And again, if the BC government is really adamant that this act will not be used to lower environmental standards, well, why isn't that in the core requirements? Like, that should just be a very simple thing that they should have considered and added to a core requirement, and they didn't. But that's where our proposed responses come in. And we have quite the list, I will say. I think this is our longest list of proposed responses, which is not meant to overwhelm you. It's just there to give you as many angles as possible for responding. And that's also where the categories come in. So you can really hone in on the type of response that most aligns with how you want to respond to the survey. So someone in the chat had made a really good point that actually reflected the project type a page previous around limiting or completely prohibiting fossil fuel projects from being eligible for fast tracking, and then also ensuring projects either do not undermine our climate goals and our biodiversity commitments, but then also support those goals and commitments that BC has made to biodiversity, ecosystems, and the climate. We have one here just to kind of bridge that gap in the fact that First Nations decision maker support is not really in scope here, but it's still a really important consideration when looking holistically at this framework for provincially significant project designation eligibility. Just asking that all Indigenous nations and governments who are directly or indirectly impacted by a project must provide free, prior, and informed consent. And then kind of a similar nature around just ensuring that projects cannot have any sort of impact to a park, protected area, an IPCA, a tribal park, ecological reserve, etc., to ensure that those areas actually remain protected and honored. And then expanding to that holistic perspective, those social and environmental benefits that Matthew alluded to before, that's sorely missing from government's lens with the IPA and with provincially significant projects. And then again, just a category getting ahead of the core requirements provision, getting ahead of the potential for critical minerals and mining projects to be eligible for fast tracking, and some direct commentary on two of the core requirements, so project readiness and material insignificant. So going into additional benefits, again, like we noted in the presentation, this is that like mandatory bonus point where a project must also meet one of these additional benefits or provide one of these additional benefits. It's very easy to see, even just with a glance at the list, that this is very economically focused, with the exception of improves community livability. That's the only one that feels a little bit workable, but the rest of this list, very economically focused. So again, our feedback really focuses on taking that more holistic view to ensure that the environment is safeguarded and considered in these fast tracking processes. So again, very similar in nature, where you just are prompted if anything is missing. If you select yes, you have the opportunity to provide a response here. And our list of proposed responses is a lot more limited. Going into the next page. This goes into that policy framework overview that Matthew noted before, where this is just general feedback on this formula. And I think that this is actually the longest page of questions. We highlight here that either if you answer with either yes, but with some modifications, or no, I disagree with this framework, that will prompt you to a long form question about how the requirements can be improved. And again, a much shorter list here of proposed responses, but honing in on the risks versus the benefits of the project. Like, what are the guardrails around projects that impose a risk? And also, where are the requirements for a project to actually demonstrably create benefits to communities, to the environment, to our climate targets? And also a really important note around how the IPA needs to be amended to clarify that free, prior, and informed consent is required before a project may be designated. So then going through, again, because this is a bit of a longer page, this is one area where we do provide a suggested response here, because they propose two methods of transparency and accountability that Matthew went through before. And we think both of those are really important. And also there needs to be more added there. So if you go down and select yes, to provide more details about what's important regarding methods of transparency, we provide a couple of proposed responses that are broken down into two categories to really bolster the province's approach to transparency and accountability around designating a project as provincially significant. And then honing in on that environmental assessment approval as well. And then this is how you can access that secret bonus page. That page 6 is if you select yes to this final question, it will take you to the next page, which addresses those tools that Matthew referenced, which are relevant to both Category 1 and Category 2 projects. So Category 2, which is those provincially significant, as well as Category 1, which is those public infrastructure projects that are owned by the province. So this is an opportunity to provide general commentary on these 3 tools that are listed in the Act. So again, very similar, like if you have concerns and you say yes, you can note which ones that you have concerns about. We have concerns about all of them, basically. I mean, local government and planning is something that we've kind of limited our commentary on, but otherwise, a lot of the methods of fast tracking we have concerns about, so that's why we suggest checking all of them. And including here, we provide some suggested responses to this multiple choice question, and then a prompt for going into more detail, where we provide some answers on providing some feedback on the tools available for provincially significant and provincial capital projects. So again, going back to the environmental standards issue, and we provide a few different options for response. Some are a little bit more nitty-gritty than others, and you're more than welcome, like we've been kind of advocating for this whole time or encouraging this whole time, is just pulling what speaks to you and kind of leaving the rest, or tailoring these responses to something that resonates with you. So I think in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up here. We do offer quite a few different responses, and we're more than happy to answer any questions about them. But yeah, as you can see, this is a long page where they solicit a lot of different feedback. There's one here asking for any other tools that we should be considering, and we just offer one response there. Okay, and then it's the demographics page, which again is very personal to you, so we don't offer any guidance there. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Oh, thank you very much. I just want to say I'm really impressed with the huge volume of work that's gone into creating that guide for everybody, and hope everybody really makes good use of that. And it looks like something that can be shared outside this webinar. So people who are completing the survey, if you know other people that you think would want to do it, please share that. I really want to thank everybody. There was a push to try and get a couple of hundred public responses to this from people who aren't associated with industry, because there's this idea going around that there'll be a big industry response supporting this on the survey. So we really need to get our friends involved in completing this if we can. So feel free to share what you've learned directly and encourage other people to complete the survey. The survey deadline is Tuesday, September 30th. So I want to thank Sarah, Corpan, Emma, Matthew, and Sebastian. Did like the heavy lifting to make this happen. Like I'm just like the host and have the script, and I'm happy to help out and with the navigation. I'm really impressed with the work you guys have done. I think all the participants got a lot out of it. Judging from the chat, they're pretty engaged. Lots of things you can click on and follow up if you're interested. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.